All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first in our U.S. Territories Wastewater Operator Training Series. Today we are going to basically be covering an overview of the upcoming program and talking about some study tips and test preparation to get you rolling. So we'll start with a brief overview and welcome. On the line from our end today are Valeria Cortez Mora, who's an intern. She's running the back end. She'll be monitoring the chat and making sure that everybody who comes to us can get into the system. I'm James Markham. I'm a research engineer here at the Southwest EFC, and we're joined by our director, Heather Himmelberger, who is going to take a few minutes to tell you some information about the background of this program and where we're going. So take it away, Heather.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that you're able to be here today with us. I wanted to just share that we come from the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, and that is a program within the University of New Mexico School of Engineering, and we are a public service arm of the university. So everything we do is outward facing, helping water and wastewater systems all over the United States, and we've done quite a bit of work over the years in the three Pacific territories of Guam, the Commonwealth and Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa. And I believe we have participants who will join us from all three islands over the course of this training, and we're super excited to provide that. And our funding comes from EPA, so we're able to provide all of this training completely free of charge. And our intent was, in working with CUC and discussing their need to help get operators funded, operators certified, we wanted to design this program to kind of give a year-long set of trainings in water, drinking water, and wastewater to help people get certified. But also, if you're not interested in certification, it's also just to make you a better operator and expose you to some things that maybe you're not as familiar with. So typically on a test, you're going to be tested on more types of treatment technologies or more types of collection systems or distribution systems or whatever it might be than what you're used to using at your own facility. So this course will also be an opportunity to go a bit further beyond just the type of system that you have. So it should help you in understanding other things to again aid you in passing the test, but also aid you just in general in your knowledge of wastewater. So with that, again, I just want to welcome everybody. You will see a variety of trainers. We have I don't know what it is now, I keep losing track, about 16 people or so that work for our organization. And we have all different kinds of skills and capabilities. So you'll see different people on different weeks. This training will be every other week, which James will talk about, but you'll see various ones of us over the year of the course. And we're always here to answer questions as well. So if you have any issues, something about a training that doesn't make sense or whatever, you're free to reach out to us or whoever the trainer was. And again, just thank you so much for being here today. And I'm going to turn it back to James, who's going to pretty much cover the rest of today. But again, thank you for being on with us. And we hope that this is a good, useful series for all of you.
All right, thanks, Heather. For those of you who are by yourselves or whoever's running the computer in the group rooms, basic Zoom chat controls are there. Typically, see everybody's got their mic off already, so that's great. If you could leave that off unless you're asking a question. You can always use the chat feature to type something in, a question in. And when we're done, we'll close the meeting down automatically, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you've got a question, you can always raise the hand feature, which is there under that React. And you can always use the chat to reach out and ask us any questions or to clarify. And as Heather said, you will be able to reach out to us afterwards, and we're going to be recording all of these sessions and making them all available to you as well. So if you want to review some materials later on, you'll be able to do that. So with that, let's get a little bit started. This series is really designed to supplement and reinforce the ABC need to know criteria for wastewater operator level 1 and 2 exams. And there will be some higher level topics talked about. And as Heather pointed out, some topics that maybe don't necessarily apply to the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, but that is really useful to know. I also want to let you know that we are not necessarily going to follow the exact order that is listed in the need to knows from WPI ABC, but over the course of this series, you will get to know those need to know criteria very, very well. You should get to know this website very well. There's a lot of different resources on there that we will be pointing you to, and we'll also point you to other kinds of resources that will be useful for you. As Heather pointed out, this is a long series. It's 26 sessions total. They're an hour each. This is the schedule for the remainder of this year. So you can see we're kind of covering a broad range of topics. Overview, some math, some information about collection systems, operator safety, and then working our way sort of in a logical fashion through the treatment train. So starting with a collection system, working on preliminary treatment, primary treatment, fixed film media, active sludge 1 and 2. And again, these may be types of treatment that are not necessarily applicable to the facilities that you work at, but they are potentially going to be covered on the exam. So it is a really good idea to learn them. And also just for reciprocity's sake, you're starting a very portable career. If you ever decide you want to come to the mainland or go to a different jurisdiction, there is reciprocity between many, many locations. So having passed the exam in one place will allow you to get certified without having to retest in another. And the place you go to may have some of these different kinds of treatment trains that you're not used to dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but that hopefully you'll have at least some familiarity with from attending this series. As Heather pointed out, there's about 16 of us at the SWEFC. The trainers are going to vary depending on the topic. And in conjunction with this wastewater series, we're doing a drinking water series as well. So some of you might be in both tracks. I want to make sure that when you attend, if you're attending in a group, that you fill out the attendee signature sheet that the facilitators will have for you. That's how we know that you've attended, so that you get credit for the hours that you're here. Those of you who are attending from your own registration at your own desk, for example, will have your log information. But for example, the GWA participants group, there's a lot of you in that room. The only way we know who's there for each session is if this sheet gets filled out. And so I'll leave it up to the attendees to kind of hold the facilitator accountable and make sure that we get that information for you. So with that, let's dig into some study tips. You're sort of starting a year-long journey, hopefully a lifelong career. And I want to go over some study tips to make sure that this process is as comfortable as it can be. Studying for a test is never fun, but to make sure that you're successful in this process. And I think the first tip, tip number one is don't panic. If you've never taken the wastewater op cert test before, or maybe you have taken it and you didn't pass or didn't get the results that you like, don't worry. This is a very doable thing, because the operator test covers knowledge that you use or could use on the job. And I say could use because, as I mentioned, it covers a lot of wastewater treatment topics at different levels, not all of which might be used in your day-to-day work. But for the test, you're going to need to know that broader range of topics. But it is very much a practical exam. When you come out of it and pass the test, you're a certified operator, which by definition is somebody who's been certified as qualified to operate a water supply or wastewater facility. In other words, you're basically taking the test to prove you know how to do the job. And many of you are in what's essentially a year-long apprenticeship or training program. So you're going to have spent some time doing the job before you actually have to take the test. And the test covers, a broad range of activities, the kinds of things that you're going to be doing on the daily: inspecting equipment, monitoring operations, collecting and testing supplies or samples, recording meter data, documenting, operating, cleaning and maintaining equipment, and things like that. So it is very much a practical exam, and you're going to be able to leverage that experience that you've gained in your day-to-day practice. Like I said, by the time you take the exam, typically you have to have been working for a year in the field in most jurisdictions. So you can leverage that day-to-day experience on test day and as you study to prepare for the test. That being said, you're going to have to study. And why? I think the biggest reason for studying and studying hard is to figure out where your knowledge gaps are, to figure out what's covered on the test that you maybe don't look at on a day-to-day basis, or find out. For me, for example, math is not my greatest subject. That's an area that I always have to work on. So the main goal for the study portion of your journey is to really find out where your knowledge gaps are, and to fill them. I like to think in terms of metaphors. So I kind of think of the operator certification test as kind of equivalent to like the big game day, right? It's the NBA finals, it's the state playoffs, it's the local league championship. Studying is practice. So, just like the shots that you shoot on the ballpark court, you need to develop skills. You use your manuals, problems, old tests, flashcards, other things that we're going to talk about as a way of practicing under different conditions, to work hard and get good at what you're not so great at. Having a decent hook shot is awesome, but if that's the only shot you have, you're not a very well-rounded ball player. And the Cert test is about verifying that you're a well-rounded operator. Another reason for studying is that people with better study methods just score higher on exams. This has been shown time and time again. If you took the test and didn't get an outcome that you liked, a good way to address that is to change how you study, analyze what you did before the exam, and change it, adapt. So to take my metaphor a little bit further, I think of sort of pickup games as taking sample tests. When your team scrimmages or you play a pickup game, that's like a practice test, right? It's like the game, but it doesn't have the big consequences. If you lose, it's not that big a deal. There's no trophy involved. It's game time conditions, but it's not the big game. Shows you what you're good at, and shows you what still needs work. If you keep getting stripped on your way to a layup, pretty much clear that you need to work on ball handling. The taking practice tests can really help with that. And it's a really good idea to focus on the areas that you have trouble with. Taking sample tests, or as we're working through materials, if there's areas that you are having trouble with, focus on them. I have a tendency, and I think a lot of people do, to kind of focus on what I'm good at. But again, this is a well-rounded exam. You need to be a well-rounded operator. So find those gaps in your knowledge, in your practical knowledge, and use the information that you have to fill in those gaps and round out your skill set. Areas that you don't do well in might just be areas that you don't have a lot of practical experience with. It might be an area that you're just not as comfortable with, but knowing where you're not doing well gives you a direction to follow and gives you the ability to kind of fill in those gaps. And then, of course, taking the metaphor to its end conclusion, the Cert test is the game day. I don't think any team would expect to win a championship without ever practicing, at least not realistically. So that's your big day. And again, if it doesn't work out the way you wanted it to, think about changing how you do your studying. So let's talk about study tips. Like, in other words, how do you run a good practice? And this is one of those things where an old boss of mine used to often say that plans don't always work, but planning does. So start by making a study plan. Think about how you're going to get to where you are now to passing the exam, whether you're going to take that exam in 6 months or a year. Start thinking about a plan. Do self-assessment over time and plan around that, and expect it to change. Like I said, when you can consistently make that hook shot, you don't have to focus on it as quite as hard. You still have to practice it once in a while, but not as at the same level as maybe something you're not so good at. It seems like a lot of pro ball players just aren't that good at free throws. Maybe they need to spend a little bit more time doing that. A related thing to do, and it's kind of a different way of looking at the same thing, is manage your time. Set aside a reasonable amount of time for study so that you are not trying to cram everything into the last minute. It's a lot of material that gets covered, even on the level 1 exam. You don't want to be trying it all to learn it all the week before the exam. That rarely works out well. So it's a good idea, especially given that you've got so much lead time before you're probably going to take the exam. Set aside a schedule for study and make sure that you stick to it. And again, start studying early. I know there's a picture of a calendar here with 4 pins. That does not mean to imply that you can get everything in your head in a month. The point is, set yourself some deadlines, make a plan, track yourself to make sure that you're on track. Again, it's just another way of saying manage your time, which is what we started this sequence with. Think about where you are, where you need to be at test day, reevaluate, look at your process, see whether you're on track, and adjust as needed. Really focus on the fundamentals. One of the things about the exam, and we'll get more into the specifics later, is it's a 100-question exam, but you typically only have to get about 70 questions right to pass. So nail down the fundamentals. That's really, really key. If you can nail the fundamentals and the basic concepts, you'll do very, very well. And again, build on that practical knowledge. You'll have the need to know list. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Get familiar with what you're comfortable with and only need to review, and what's new material or things that you have difficulty with, so that, again, you can work harder on the weak spots. As part of that practical sort of assessment and understanding, I think it's a really good idea, as you're learning your job, as you're learning new processes at the treatment plant, to ask a lot of questions. Learn from your coworkers, learn from the journeymen who've been there for a while, the people who are already certified, the people who are managing areas that you're working under. Ask questions about what you're doing. Explain processes to each other. I have usually find that if I can explain something clearly, I understand it. And if I can't explain it clearly, it means I haven't quite gotten it yet. So this is basically an exhortation to lean on your buddies, lean on your coworkers, work together to make sure that you understand not only what you have to do, but why you're doing it, what the processes in the treatment train accomplish, how they physically work, because knowing how the processes function is going to help you a lot on the exam. There's a lot of available training materials and study guides and handouts out there. You should get familiar with at least the need to knows, and probably several others that I'm going to show you here. Do not expect to just come to these 26-hour-long sessions and be ready to take the exam. This is meant to supplement other materials. It's meant to explain some things that maybe you don't deal with on the regular. It is not by itself going to get you through the exam. So in addition to coming to these and referring to them and maybe even rewatching some sessions, plan on using available study guides, materials, and handouts. As I said, the WPI ABC website, gowpi.org, is something that you're going to get very, very familiar with. There are a lot of useful tools in here, study materials, information about the exam formats that are useful. So if you've got an internet connection at home, or you can access one at work, plan on browsing this. We'll provide you with a lot of these materials as well, because they are freely available. So as we go through the training session, we'll be pushing out materials to individual registrants and to the facilitators that are facilitating the group things. As I mentioned, this is sort of designed to supplement and reinforce the ABC need to know criteria. We're focusing on wastewater operator levels 1 and 2. There are going to be some higher level topics covered. And as I mentioned, we're not necessarily going to follow the exact order that's listed in the need to knows. We're going to more or less be working ourselves from the collection system through to the end of treatment. You need to study stuff outside this series, and again, be able to apply that on the job or training that you receive as apprentices and training operators to pass the exam. But let's talk a little bit about the need to knows. If you haven't looked at them, basically for each level exam, there's about an 8 or 9 page document that lets you know what topics are going to be covered and how many questions there are going to be on there. And you can see in this table here, we've got levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the breakdown of topics and the concentration of topics varies a little bit by certification level, particularly in the middle categories. Security, safety, and administrative procedures is the same pretty much across the board in terms of the number of questions you're going to see. But in the earlier levels, you're going to see more about equipment maintenance and operation than you are in the later levels. Similarly, on the treatment process, you're going to see a little less of that at the lower levels, and more of that as you get to the level 3 and level 4. That being said, we're going to talk about all of these things as we go through. Another useful thing to recognize is that there are 3 basic question formats that the exam uses. There are recall questions, which are essentially testing your sort of memorized knowledge, your recognition of specific facts, of concepts, of how processes work. These aren't typically going to have any math in them, but you're going to have to be able to illustrate or recall or recognize specific information and what it means. There's also application questions. This is where the math typically comes in. There's going to be basic problem solving. So you might look at things like detention times or settling rates. You'll get some data. You'll have to apply it. You'll have to spit out an answer. And I will point out that quite often the exams have answers that are almost right, but not quite. So, there's going to be some amount of explanation, calculation, and then there are analysis questions, which are typically the most complex, where there's going to be higher level problem solving. There may be some math involved in these, but you're basically going to be analyzing, evaluating, and using deductive reasoning to come to a solution. The good thing about this is for every level, they let you know how many of each kind of question there's going to be on the exam. So there's 10 about lab analysis on level 1, 25 about equipment evaluation and maintenance, 25 about equipment operation, etc. 100 questions total, and you can see sort of the complexity and the number of questions of those 3 types that are there. Note that there are going to be at least 10 calculation questions. Sometimes they add extra questions to the exam that aren't scored just to test them out. So sometimes there may be a few more math questions. Even though you only have to get a 70, you don't want to just throw away 10 potential question points because you don't know how to do the math. It's critical for the job. It's really important to learn. And for every level, you will have a formula sheet and conversion sheet that you'll be allowed to reference during the exam. That being said, it is a very good idea to get very familiar with this because it's a couple of pages long. Actually, it's 10 pages long. This version varies from state to state, but the version you'll be using is 10 pages long. And if you're taking the test on a computer, you might not even have a paper version. You might have a digital version that you're accessing. So it's a really good idea to be really familiar with the formula conversion sheet so that you know where different kinds of formulas are, so that you know if you get an area question, that's on page 1, another type of question or formula might be on page 9. It's about learning the tools and getting efficient so that you don't spend a lot of time looking for a formula when you could actually be answering the question. There's a lot of study guides that are available. Your utility may have some. It may be worth particularly if you're thinking about this as a long-term career, getting your own copies. I know we've placed some at some libraries in the islands as well. A couple of them are available here or shown here. I've got a copy of the one on the left on my desk pretty much at all times. It's kind of the Bible for wastewater treatment. There's a couple of different versions, but for the Cert exams level 1 and level 2, volume 1 is pretty much what you need. Links to these and other study guides are available on the WPI website. And other operators at your utility may also have copies. For the longest time, I used to borrow one of my coworker AJ's book because he had copies of these and I didn't. And then eventually I got myself my own set. That being said, you don't have to limit yourself to just what's available on the WPI site. A lot of states have free information available that you can freely download. And wastewater treatment is wastewater treatment. There are different versions of the certification exam, but they all test more or less the same thing. So it's perfectly legitimate to look at non-ABC study guides and sample tests to prepare. So I grew up in Washington, which is why the state of Washington's here. But they're what they call the Red Book, which is an information manual that's a study guide, is freely available on their website. We'll provide that for you as well. But other states have these available as well. So if you're sort of looking to expand your knowledge, look at how other states are maybe asking the same kinds of questions, and presenting the information, just recognize you're not limited to just WPI. There's a lot of tools out there that you can use. So while you're reviewing this stuff, don't just read it, take good notes when you study so that you can use them as references. And one thing that I particularly like to do is use my reference materials to essentially make up questions for myself, because if you read through them, you will see that the statements that are buried in your training materials can be kind of reworded and turned into questions. So for example, here's a paragraph from one of the guides about pipe size. And just to read it, a sewer line should be at least large enough to allow the use of the cleaning equipment available. When sized properly, a sewer line should flow 1/2 full during average daily flows. The airspace above half full sewer line helps to maintain aerobic conditions in the wastewater and provides some room for error in determining design flow. So a couple of different sentences that you could actually reword. There's at least 3 questions embedded in here. So for example, when sized properly, a sewer line should flow 1/2 full during average flow days. You could turn that into a question and put it on a flashcard. How full should a sewer line flow if it's properly sized? The answer, half full. Same thing here, this piece down here, another kind of question. What does the airspace do? Helps maintain aerobic conditions. And there's actually a third one at the top as well. So, as you're reviewing materials and taking notes, sometimes it's a really good idea to kind of rephrase the statements as questions, because quite often those are the kinds of questions you're going to run into in the exam. If you are a visual person, and I definitely am, draw problems out. Sketching the drawing and actually writing out the formula can sometimes help you see exactly what you're after. You can tell I'm a terrible artist, but again, drawing the problem can be a really useful way of making sure you understand the question, that you know what's being asked, that you understand which variables they've given you and what thing you're looking for. Because as with most standardized questions, some of the answers are there specifically to trip you up. They look almost right, they look plausible, but they're not. So one way of sort of evaluating a tank volume question, where you've got a rectangular tank, well, it's like, well, my formula is length times width times height. What have they given me? They've given me all 3 of those. So if I look at my formula, I know I've got the 3 multipliers. I just need to solve for the volume. And if you draw it out, again, you can make sure that you're applying the right formula to the right question. There's a fair amount of memorization that has to occur in any job, right? You learn tools of the trade, tricks of the trade, but there are some do's and some don'ts when it comes to memorization. Before the test, for the test, and for work, formulas you use for all the time, for example, are a good idea to memorize if you can. Again, if you've got something memorized, you don't necessarily have to look it up on the cheat sheet. What you don't want to memorize is that there was a volume question on the sample test, and the last time I took it, the answer was 1 million gallons, right? You don't want to memorize the individual answers, you want to memorize the process. That being said, you might have to just memorize material in areas that you're not familiar with through your work experience, like maybe a section on specific design regs or something that's applicable. But again, the more you memorize, the less you have to look up. If you know that a cubic foot of water has 7.481 gallons, that's one thing you don't have to look up, and might also help you eliminate some of the obviously wrong answers. It is a good idea as you progress through your study to test yourself or have someone test you. I can tell you this from personal experience. In one of my college math classes, I walked into the final with a B+ and I walked out with an F because I had not been taking practice tests. I could do all the homework problems pretty well, but I couldn't do them very fast. So I failed not because I couldn't do the work, but because I couldn't do it fast enough. So again, practicing under game time conditions, taking sample tests, using flashcards and seeing how quickly you can get through them can be really, really useful. And again, flashcards don't work for everybody, but if you're trying to memorize things, they can be your best friend. It's a great way to have someone test you or to test yourself. And if someone else is testing you, they literally don't even have to understand the topic to ask you the questions. You know, you could have your husband, your wife, your kid periodically test you. And again, I make my notes like those ones that I showed you out of the texts. I put those on flashcards, on note cards. So I effectively create my own flashcards and create exam study material as I'm learning it. One note with index cards, it's a really good idea to mix up the order every time so that you don't sort of learn the song lyrics from the beginning to the end and not know where the second chorus is. I know, like I used to be in a band and I often could recite an entire song if I start at the beginning, but if I start in the middle, I can't find it. And also don't throw them away when you pass the test. You know, you're gonna wanna take higher level exams potentially later on. You might have new apprentices coming in who will be forever in your debt if you can give them a great set of flashcards. When you take those higher level exams, you're still responsible for the lower level knowledge. So hang on to them, loan them out to your buddies. Some of your buddies may already have some. And again, as you get certain questions consistently right, set them aside. Don't stop reviewing them, but don't look at them as often. You know, the things that you get right 3 or 4 times in a row, put it to the side. Again, focus on the stuff that you're having trouble with, and then occasionally dip back into the knowledge that you are comfortable with to make sure that it's still there. Studying with a partner can be great. It helps with accountability. I have often studied with somebody just at a given time. We're not even necessarily in the same room. Literally for one exam, we used to just get on Zoom and have the other person in the corner for accountability. Of course, if you're studying with somebody and all you do is chit chat, that doesn't help. So again, only do this if it helps, but having some accountability, having somebody to bounce questions off of, having someone that you can explain things to, or that can maybe explain to you concepts that you don't quite understand can be really, really useful and can really kind of help you through the process. So it's a little premature because the test is a while away, but I do want to kind of focus on this because it's useful to understand about what to do on test day, because some of you may be actually taking the test relatively soon, others may be taking it later. It is really important to have a clear idea of the test format that you are going to use because it is different in different jurisdictions. ABC actually has 3 different possibilities, but the choice of format is up to the jurisdiction you're testing in. So find out exactly how you're going to be tested. Some places you go to a computer-based testing center and take the test there. They also have web-based options where a person signs on and takes the test from their own location. And then some places have paper testing. And knowing which format you're going to be in is really useful. I have a friend who actually failed his engineering exam because it used to be all on paper. And when he took it, he was in the first class where they were required to do it on a computer, and he was not familiar with the format. And it threw him. So there's 3 different ways. Find out which your jurisdiction uses. So again, here in New Mexico, everything's on a computer. And if it's your first time taking a test that way, it can be a little intimidating. And it's also not cheap. It's $110 to take the exam in Guam, for example. So you want to spend that money judiciously. That being said, part of your testing strategy might actually be to schedule a test exam for yourself. In order to familiarize yourself with the process, kind of like the preseason game, right? Where it's against another team in your league, but it doesn't really count for anything. Quite often, folks that do that, because there's less pressure, actually end up passing the exam when they're taking their sort of test, which is great. That being said, you don't want to throw money away, so make sure that you think you're ready before you do that. Like I said, there's a lot of reference guides out there. You really want to understand your test tools, particularly your reference guides. So knowing where things are is great. There's only about 10 to 12 math questions typically on there, but you don't want to lose points on the exam because you can't find the right formula or you don't know how to correctly apply it. Another key thing to passing this exam is to monitor your test time during the exam, understanding how much time you have for questions. So the ABC exam, it's 3 hours long, which is pretty long, but there's 100 questions on it. So if you do the math, that's only 1 minute 48 seconds for each question. You've only got to get 70 of them right, but you really don't want to only answer 70. That is not a recommended strategy. But even if you did that and were only able to answer 70, you only have about 2.5 minutes per question. So realize that you don't have a ton of time. Some of the questions you're going to be able to answer in a snap of your finger. Others are going to take a little more time. The point here, it's not a lot of time. You want to get as many as right as possible. They're designed to be answered quickly. Calculations are typically basic, but as I said, the answers are sometimes designed to trip you up. So if you find yourself getting stuck on a question, don't kill time. Again, you don't have to get 100% to pass it. If you're getting stuck, circle the question, move on, come back later to look at it. Plenty of people have only answered 80 questions on the exam and still passed. That being said, you should aim for being able to complete 100 questions in that 3-hour period. And I think it's a very good idea, if you can, to get a hold of a practice exam and actually sit down for a 3-hour exam, even if that's just making one yourself. Again, they don't care what order you answer the questions in, but I do recommend circling a question that you haven't answered, just so that you can find it again when you're going through. So we talked a little bit about studying, a little about reference guides, some about test time. Let's talk about the actual test questions that you're liable to run into and some thoughts about answering them. Standardized tests are kind of designed to trip you up a little bit. And there are some common techniques that you can use to make your chances of getting the question right better. Number one is don't fight the premise. Do not try to outthink the test. Typically, they will have you pick the most correct answer. You might do a calculation on your calculator or on a piece of paper and come up with a slightly different number. If you're confident it's right, pick the closest number to it. Make sure you're answering the question that is asked of you, not what you think it should be, right? You don't want to fight the premise. Another thing to look for is sort of goofy answers or things that just kind of make you chuckle. They're typically wrong. There may be something mildly humorous in there that's correct, but most of the time, if you see something that is obviously funny, it's a wrong answer. So for example, and this is a real example question, the best way for a manager to transmit information that's important to all employees is, and the first question you might be asking yourself is, why am I not showing you any of the answers yet? Because I think it's a very good technique to read the question first without looking at the answers to make sure you understand what they're asking for. Because a lot of times you're going to read the question and you're going to know what the answer is, and then you'll be able to just look for it on the list, check it off, and move on. If you're not sure what the answer is, then you start looking through the possibilities to find out the best one. But so, for example, if the first answer is tell your mom, that's probably not the right answer, right? So here we've got 4 different operations. And again, you can kind of logic your way through this. So tell your mom, if your mom's the town gossip like mine was, maybe that would be a useful way of getting the information across, but probably not. So that leaves us with 3 answers. And just by eliminating that one, we've gone from a 25% chance of getting the right answer just by guessing to 33. This is all about, playing the odds, making them be in your favor. So our other options here: send a memorandum, have a face-to-face meeting, and put a notice on the website. And if I want to be cynical, who reads memorandum? Who all has a mailbox? Doing a memorandum or posting something on a board is not necessarily the best way to get urgent information out very quickly. Same thing with putting a notice on the plant's website. That's typically externally facing. It's for people outside of the utility. So by just kind of logicking our way through this, we can recognize that of these 4 options, the best option is to have a face-to-face meeting, because that's the one way you can absolutely guarantee that the information is getting across. So what we're kind of doing there is answering knowledge with knowledge and common sense, or answering questions with knowledge and common sense. Like I said, it's a very practical kind of exam. So again, you'll be able to bring that practical knowledge to bear when you're answering questions. So here's another one. And again, real example, chlorine cylinder is thought to be leaking. If aqueous ammonia vapor is passed over the valve in the presence of a leak, what would that cause? So again, not showing the answers, because the first thing is to kind of assess the question and what you know about it. So what we've got here is leaking chlorine. What do we know about chlorine? It's a disinfectant. Chlorine gas is very, very poisonous. It's what they used in trench warfare to kill each other in World War I. So we already know that, you know, we're being asked a question about a very dangerous situation. So then we look at the answers. And these are the actual answers from this particular exam: a loud noise, an odor of hydrogen sulfide, red smoke, or white smoke. So think about the answers and what they mean. What causes loud noises? Explosions. You know, the question is positing that you're standing near the cylinder passing ammonia vapor over it. So the idea that you're going to do something that's going to put you in the area of an explosion just doesn't make any sense. So we can get that out. Same thing with odor of hydrogen sulfide. We know chlorine is poisonous. If we're anywhere near what we think is leaking chlorine gas, we're going to be using PPE. Going to be covered up. We're going to be using a gas mask. We're not going to be smelling anything. Would you ever put yourself in a position to actually smell chlorine gas? No. So again, that is not a viable answer, which leaves us with two visual signals, which kind of makes sense. If you're even head to toe full PPE, you can see what's going on. So you've narrowed it down to a 50-50, leaves us two options, red smoke and white smoke. And in this case, like I said, you might not even have to work your way through this process because you just knew the answer offhand. But even if you had to guess at this point, you still got a 50-50 chance, and it happens to be that the right answer is white smoke. Again, this is very much about leveraging your experience in work. Many questions are going to be about things like units and how processes work. So this is another sample question that we're going to work our way through. What units are used to measure settlable solids? So again, look at the question. What are they asking? What is it about? It's about settlable solids. We're taking a measurement and we've got something settling. Settlable means it's not settled yet. In other words, it's solids that are floating in something. And typically in the wastewater world, they're floating in liquid. So think about maybe where you might be doing this kind of process from your experience. Maybe in a clarifier, what's in there? There's small amounts of solid and a lot of liquid. How do you measure solids? Probably mass. What's left in the tank once all the solids are settled? Liquid. So what we're looking for here is something that gives us a measurement of mass over volume. So knowing that, we can evaluate the answers. And we've got three options. Well, the second one is volume over mass. It's the right units, but they're backwards. So that one's out. The third one is actually volume over volume, which doesn't make any sense. D is just a different version of B. Again, it's volume divided by mass, which leaves us the top one, which is mass over volume. Milligrams is a measurement of mass. Liters is a measurement of volume. That fits the premise of our question. So that's our right answer. So again, you can really, really use what you understand about the processes to logic your way through these questions and do it very, very quickly. Another thing that they love to do on standardized questions or tests is to ask these sort of not questions, like which of these things is not like the other one, like on Sesame Street, right? Sometimes it makes sense to actually reframe the question to make it a little bit easier to answer, which again is not fighting the premise, it's just looking at it in a different way. So if you got this exam question, which of the following is not a measure of volume? Well, you could look at your examples and say, well, another way of looking at this question is, which one of these is a measure of volume? And we've got a couple of different things here that are obviously volume. And I could also figure this out by looking at my cheat sheet. This is a different cheat sheet. This happens to be from New Mexico. But if I know where my volume section is, I can jump in here really quickly and look for units to see if they make any sense. So gallons, we've got a conversion of cubic feet to gallons. If you've got that memorized, you'd already be able to eliminate those two. And everybody knows gallons is volume. That's what milk comes in and soda. Those come in half gallons. And then that gives us a couple other options. We've got cubic meters, which is another conversion. We can convert gallons to cubic meters. Cubic is volume, right? Length times width times height. So we know that those three are measures of volume. The question is asking which is not. The only thing that's left is square inches. And again, another way of looking at this would be to look at the formula sheet. Square inches shows up in the area side of things. So we know that sort of reverting it back into the original form, the one that's not a measure of volume is D. So again, sketching can help. Same sort of thing, same question answered a different way. If we look at a measure of volume, we know that's 3 dimensions, length times width times height. If I sketch out a box, I know I got 3 dimensions here. That works for cubic feet. I've got length, I got width, I've got height. It works for cubic meters. I know gallons is convertible. I know that gallons is a volume. So again, the square inches is only 2 of those measures. That's the one that's not available. So in summary, and this session is going to be a little on the short side because again, this is not really substantive, but we wanted to kind of prepare you for this system. We want you to succeed in this training. We want you to succeed with your testing and with your career. Wastewater operators are sort of half of the duo that keep us all safe. Wastewater operators and water operators make sure that we have good wastewater treatment and clean water. Those are crucial for our communities. Society can't really function without clean water. So first off, kudos for choosing this career path. And we want to make sure, again, that you succeed in this process. So in summary, make sure that you've got a study plan. Make sure that includes time management. Make sure that you read your various training handouts and materials. And if you get through everything you have and you need more, feel free to reach out to us. We can point you in the right direction of additional materials. Make sure that as you're studying this, you're not just reading. Take notes during training. I often read aloud. I sometimes, take questions and turn them into little songs in my head. Whatever works for you, whatever helps you retain knowledge, do that. I find that reading and taking notes is good because I'm sort of doing the same thing in 2 different ways. And that way I've got a study reference for later. Take the big book and I condense it into notes, and then I condense that into flashcards so that I can actually get it into my head and make it all stick. Again, drawing sketches of problems can help you. And if that works for you, it's a good idea to do it. Test yourself. Again, this is about understanding the materials, about knowing the materials, but it's also about being able to kind of, for lack of a better word, regurgitate it during the exam, right? You have to be able to get it out of your head onto the paper in a specific amount of time. So you want to make sure that you've tested yourself under effectively game time conditions to make sure that you can do the questions, that you can answer them correctly, and that you can answer them correctly in the amount of time that you have. Again, as you are spending your time doing studying, pay attention to your strong points, know what you're good at, but focus on the weak points. Build up those, the weak muscles so that you have a better chance of passing the exam. 70 is out of 100 doesn't seem like a lot, but the questions are often tricky. Memorize what you need to. Again, the more things you memorize, like formulas and processes and how things work, the less you have to look up. The only reference you're going to have is that formula and conversion sheet. That's very, very helpful. but it's not going to answer conceptual questions. It's not going to answer process questions. So make sure you understand how things work. And when you're looking at exam questions, see if you can relate them to activities that you do, because if you can, it's going to make it a lot easier to kind of work your way to the correct answer. Study with partner if it helps. And last but not least, start studying early. And again, this is a really portable career. If you want to stay in your local community, that's great. If you want to venture further afield, reciprocity is a thing. You know, a lot of different states, you know, for example, Washington State has reciprocity with a bunch of different states, including Guam. You know, if you decide you want to spend some time off island, this is the kind of career that you can do that with. And having passed the ABC exam, which I believe is the most commonly used exam around the country, can give you kind of a leg up if you decide you want to look for a job elsewhere for some time before you maybe come back home. So that's about 50 minutes. We've got 10 minutes left over. If anybody has any questions about the program, now's the time to ask.
So
again,
yeah.
there.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a couple questions in the chat. The first
Okay.
one is by Travis, and he's asking, any preference on what states provide the best manuals, and what about practice exams?
I like the Washington manual. New Mexico has some really good ones. We will put together a set of links, like a PDF document with links to some good resources. Again, want you to be familiar with the WPI website, but don't expect you to spend all of your time hunting these things down. So we will provide them for you. Again, sort of the best overall manual, I think, for review for the exams are these two right here. Sacramento State has a series of manuals. They're not cheap. They're about $100 a piece. But they've got two for wastewater treatment plants. They've got one for collection systems, I believe, and then connectwef.org has a wastewater operator's guide for preparing for the certification exam. I believe the 4th edition is the current version. There are links to these on the WPI website. If I was only going to get one or two, I'd get one of these. They will pretty much cover everything that you will possibly need to know very well. And again, there are some other free resources out there that we will provide to you. One of the things that we are putting together is an accessible folder on our servers that anybody attending these sessions, so facilitators or students, will be able to download resources from. And so as we point out different resources, we'll make sure that copies of them are there that you can download. Also, the recordings of these individual training sessions will be there as well. I think long-term, we're probably going to put them on our YouTube channel in a playlist, but know that those materials will build up over the course of the year as we build this program out, and all of those tools will be available to you. And there are some practice exams out there. We have some, and some of the other agencies also have practice exams. So we'll locate those for you and provide them. And I guess we sort of got the same question twice. And we will send out, like I said, PDFs. Typically what we'll do is in individual sessions, as we're covering a topic, we'll send out either sample questions or handouts before the exam, so the facilitators can pass them around to the attendees, either before or after, depending on which is more appropriate, and that individuals who are watching, from their own locations have access to those as well. And let me throw our basic contact info up here so that you have it. The facilitators have all of our information. They can get in touch with us. Our main sort of default email address is swefc@unm.edu. So feel free as this session goes through to reach out to that email address with questions, and we will do our best to answer them. And typically these sessions will have at least 5 or 10 minutes of question and answer time at the end that we can use. And we're also typically more than happy to stick around and answer questions afterwards. So, it's not necessarily a hard 5 o'clock deadline. Well, 5 o'clock our time, 9 o'clock your time. So if somebody needs some extra time, we're more than happy to talk, because again, this is what we do for fun and for employment. And the more help we can provide to you, the better off we all are.